Now let's talk about stage versus non-stage payloads. And before we do that, we must talk about a payload. So a payload is what we're going to run as an exploit. And when we run that exploit, it's called a payload. We use different types of payloads depending on what it is. So you might see a Windows type payload or a Linux type payload, or as you see on the screen, interpreter type payload. There's Python. There's all different types. There's like 500 and something that we saw in Metasploit alone. And these payloads are what we use to send to a victim and attempt to get a shell on the machine. Now, it's going to make more sense as we go. It's okay if you're still a little bit confused on all of this. There are two main types of payloads that we need to pay attention to. There is what we call non-stage and what we call staged. Now, a non-stage payload sends the exploit shellcode all at once, where a staged payload sends it in stages. The non-stage payload is larger in size and it doesn't always work, where the stage payload can actually be less stable. So each has its con. And we have an example of it, and this is really what I want to point out, is we have this non-stage payload and we have a stage payload. And you see the one difference between the two? All it is a /. So when we see these and we're using something like Metasploit and we have to pick out a payload, if we see something like meterpreter _reverse _TCP, this identifies that this is a non-stage payload. We can ignore the windows here. But here where we see meterpreter /reverse _TCP, this means we have a staged payload. What's happening? It's saying, hey, stage 1, stage 2. What's happening here? It's saying, hey, let's send this all at once. So this is going to become very important very quick, as we will attempt an exploit here very soon and it's not going to work. And then we're going to change the payload and it's going to work beautifully. So understand that what the takeaway is, if you have a payload that does not work, maybe try the other type of that payload. If you see something like reverse TCP, which is a reverse shell, by the way, over a TCP connection, if you say, hey, I'm going to send this stage reverse TCP, it's not working. All right, let me try to send a non-staged reverse TCP. Okay, that's not working, but I'm sure my exploit's right. So maybe I send a bind shell instead of a reverse shell here, and I'll send a bind shell staged and then non-staged. And we just keep trying until we find a payload that works. Not every payload is the right payload, and we have to find the one that works for us. So the takeaways: remember the /, remember the slight differences between non-stage and stage, and remember, if your payload fails but you think it's the right exploit, maybe change your payload. So we'll see that here very shortly as we start to get into exploitation in the next few videos. Whew, I am excited. And let me tell you how excited I am. This is not the first time I've recorded this video. This is actually the second time recording this video, because the first time I forgot to hit the record button. So now it's blinking red right in front of me, guaranteed recording. And I'm still as excited. Even the second time walking through this, I'm still as excited, because this is what we've been building up for. This is everything we've been doing. The scanning, the enumeration, even the Linux and the Python. This is all building up to this. And now we're ready to exploit. We're going to get our first shell. We're going to pop our first shell today. And I'm so excited for both of us. So what we're going to do is we're going to run Metasploit for this one. And Metasploit's a little bit automated, but that's okay. In the next video, we're going to go ahead and cover it manually. So what we're going to do is we're going to attack SMB here. And with SMB, what we're going to do is, if you don't remember, search exploit Samba 2.2. We found Samba 2.2.1a. We searched around, we went out to the interwebs, we did search exploit, and we kept seeing this trans to open show up. Like here, and here, 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 all down here, right? Repeatedly. And it meets the criteria. Everything seems to make sense. It had that IPC anonymous connection as well. So I think this is a winner. And we're going to go ahead and give it a try. So I'm going to copy this, and we're just going to go ahead and type in MSF console and load up Metasploit. Once Metasploit loads, we're going to go ahead and just search for this guy and see if we can't find it. Now we know it exists because we did find that handy dandy Rapid7 website that said it did. So we're going to search it here, and we're given 4 options. Now, these are all operating systems here, but we have been good enumerators and good investigators, researchers, information gatherers, etc. We could have willy-nilly just saw 139, said, hey, I'm going to try to find exploits against it, and never looked at any other ports, but that's not us. We went out to port 80, we saw that it was running Red Hat, we discovered Linux on the machine, so we know we're going to pick the Linux module. So we're going to say use 1 as that corresponds to this module here. And then we're going to type in options. And all we have to do is set a rhost. So remember, rhost stands for remote host, or the victim that we're attacking. So we're going to say set rhost and 192.168.5.7.134. And we're going to say options one more time, make sure that that actually set in there, and it did. Now, one thing I like to do is type in show targets. Now, there are no targets here, but as you're going to see later on in the course, there are often targets that we have to pick from. Not always is the first choice that's auto-selected right for us, but in this instance, there's only one choice, so it's the right choice. So now we have 2 options. Both are going to do the same thing for us. We can type in run, or we could type in exploit if we want to be cool. I want to be cool. Let's type in exploit. So we're going to run this, and it's going to start this brute force attack here, and it's going to start opening shells and closing shells. What is going on? So let's Control C. If yours is doing this, go ahead and Control C, interrupt this. Let's talk about what's happening. So you see it's trying this brute force attack. It's trying different return addresses here, and finally it lands on one that works, and it says, hey, I'm going to send this stage. This is always a good sign, by the way, sending the stage. Then it says, hey, I've got this Meterpreter session open because our payload has worked, and then this Meterpreter session closed. Reason died. That's not good. So it keeps going through over and over and over and over, and it's just dying. What is going on? Well, we've talked about this. Let's go into options again. Now, you don't see this the first time you do it, but you see it the second time because Metasploit says, hey, if your payload's not working, maybe the payload's the issue. And I'm going to give you payload options this time around. Now we see payload options here in the middle. That wasn't there before. We can see that we're running Linux x86 Meterpreter /reverse_TCP. What does that mean? Well, that means that we are running a staged payload. Couple other things to note while we're in here. We see lhost. That is the opposite of rhost. Lhost is us. We are the listening host. So we sit here and we have our IP address. Sometimes this auto selects correctly, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, it did. And then we have the L port, which is by default all 4s. So that's fine for now. It's fine for these lessons. When you get into actually running this in the wild, all 4s is probably going to get you picked up pretty quick because this is a default Meterpreter port. So if some connection sees or some antivirus or detection software sees 4444 open up, this is going to trigger an alarm here. But anyway, for this course, you're not going to need to worry about it too much. Right now, we're going to go ahead and set a payload. We're going to say set payload. And how do we know what payload to pick? Let's just start typing out Linux and hit tab. And it auto tabs out the x86 part for us. And then let's just hit double tab. All right, now with double tab, that's great. Look at the payload options we have. We got a bunch. Now, we've got a bunch of Meterpreters, but unfortunately, they're all staged payloads here. I love a good Meterpreter shell, and you guys will understand why as we move forward. But as of right now, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to use one. If we come over to this right column here, you can see that we've got other shells as well. And we come down, and finally down here, we've got a few options that are non-staged. So let's go ahead and try this shell reverse _TCP right here. And you can just start typing that out. And that should auto tab complete for you. Go ahead and hit enter. Hit options one more time to make sure that this actually works. You can see here that it actually picked up. And now let's go ahead and try to run this. And let's see if it happens. Fingers crossed. Hey, look at that. So we've got a shell now. And it says command shell session open 5. Let's try, who am I? Root, hostname, Captrix level 1. We have successfully rooted this machine. Root is the commander of the system. We cannot go any deeper than this. We own this machine. Hands down, it's our machine. So congratulations. You have made it this far. This is your first rooted machine. You should be very proud. Pat yourself on the back. You're awesome. So from here, we're going to go ahead and we're going to focus on port 80 and 443 and how we can exploit those manually. And then we'll move on to some other exploitation techniques. But for now, congratulate yourself. You have your first shell. I'm very excited for you. So I'll catch you over in the next video as we start some manual exploitation. So we have gained root with Metasploit, but now we need to gain root with some manual exploitation. So remember earlier, we discovered that we had an exploit with our mod SSL, and we're going to see what we could do about it. So we went to Google and we researched mod SSL and we came up with something called Open Luck, if you remember that. So we clicked on this Open Luck here, and this is the same as the one that is out there on exploit database, but it is fixed. So remember, the exploit database one is broken, so we'd rather use this one that is fixed. So what we're going to do is we're going to follow the instructions here. And this is very well laid out. So it tells you to git clone this. We need to do an install of an SSL dev library. We need to compile and then run the exploit. So very, very straightforward. We're going to go ahead and do exactly what it says. And let's go ahead and just copy this first line here. And I'm going to just make this a little smaller, go into a terminal. And I actually have a folder for Captrix. I'm going to cd into it. And then we're going to go ahead and just paste that line. And it will git clone everything. If we ls, now we see that it is there. So let's cd into that folder, the bad word folder, and we'll ls. And now you can see that there is just the C file here in the README. So what we're going to do is we need to install this libssl dev. So we're going to say apt install and then libssl-dev like this, hit enter, and then just hit enter because it says yes already. This will take just a second to install. And then once it does this, we're going to use a tool, looks like, called GCC, which GCC is a compiler. So if you've never used C or are familiar with C, we have a C file, but this isn't ready to use. We have to compile that C file in order to actually use it. So that's what we're doing here, is we're downloading a little bit of stuff to actually be able to compile that. GCC is built in, and we just needed some other things additionally. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say GCC, and typically you say -o for the output, so we can call it whatever we want. We'll just call this open. And then we'll just specify the file. You can start typing it and then tab out. And then it says this L crypto, which is important. Hit enter, okay, and then hit ls. And you see now in pretty green lighting up and saying, hey, we're executable. We have our executable, right? We have our script that we can run. So we could say /open and run it. And you can see in here all the different options that this runs against. So you remember when it was brute forcing, the last one, when we saw the trans to open was kind of doing a brute force. In theory, this is what it could do as well, but here we actually have to pick a return address based on our machine. So we're going to look at the usage. I always like to do the application without any usage to see what the usage is. And we need to use target box, which is one of these down here. We need to select a port. Maybe it says for SSL connection. We're not going to be using an SSL connection, so don't worry about that. And then a -C number. And it says use range 40 to 50 if you don't know. So our syntax is going to look something like ./open, one of these offsets that we're going to pick, and then it's going to be a -C, probably 40, with the box IP address in between. So how do we find what we're looking for? Well, I'm going to cheat just a little bit and tell you guys to scroll down, 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 down. And if we look at 6B here, remember, we were up against Apache 1.3.20. See, enumeration comes into play big time. So Apache 1.3.20. Now there are two we can run against. I'm picking this one. I believe it's the more stable one. So we could pick either one, but I would choose B. I think A doesn't work all the time. So let's choose B here. And Apache 1.3.20 is the indicator. And again, Red Hat Linux, so that's another indicator. So let's copy this so we don't forget it. And we're just going to scroll down and we're going to say, hey, ./open, and we're going to paste that 0x6b. And then we're going to run this against the IP address because it said box was next. So 134. And then remember we had to give a -C of 40. So that is the syntax. Sometimes you have to follow along, and it's I don't think most of them are as confusing as this. I don't, when you say this is confusing, I would just say it's pretty lengthy for a exploit because you have to go through all the different offsets here to find the offset and actually fire this off. But you know, you have the opportunity here to actually be able to read usage and just understand your way through it. So once you get this little syntax and all this part down, it's really not that bad. So to check off the list, we've got the target, we've got the box IP address. We don't need the port because we're not running against SSL. We're just going to run this against port 80, and then we're going to run -C of 40. So let's go ahead and try to fire that off and see what happens here. And this may just take a second. Okay, it says it's spawning a shell. Now we wait for the SUID. Let's scroll up just a little bit while we're waiting here to see. So it looks like it sent the shell code and it spawned a shell. And it says, hey, we have no job control in this shell. And then it has a shell here, bash 2.05. That is a shell. And then it's going in and it's doing some wgets. Now, if this is able to get out to the internet, it's going to go ahead and try to do wgets against these. It's going to keep downloading and it's going to get the response here. Okay. And now it says we wait for the shell because it saved this .c file here. And let's see if maybe we already have a shell. Who am I? Root. Look at that. So it looks like it downloaded something and allowed us to maybe privilege escalate here. And let's say hostname. Okay. So we've gone through and we've rooted this machine with Metasploit, and now we've gone through and rooted this machine with the manually downloaded exploit. So there's two options. You're going to find out that Metasploit is a more robust and popular option, especially as a penetration tester. Now, there is a common misconception or thought process put out there by certifications. The OSCP, for example, doesn't let you use a lot of Metasploit, only one instance of Metasploit on their exam. So everybody thinks, man, I really shouldn't use Metasploit. But you're going to see in this course how useful it really is and how robust it is. And if you talk to a penetration tester, they're going to use the best tools available to them. The certifications out there that do that are just making it harder to pass the exam intentionally than they are, for practicality. This course is all about practicality. So from here, now that we've exploited it manually, let's talk about a couple things that we look for in post. So post being post exploitation, and we're going to cover this over and over and over again. We're not going to get into it fully right now. I just want to give you an idea as to the thought process. So the first thing to think about is, what is our IP address We could say ifconfig if it'll allow us to. It depends on what kind of shell we're in. And see, this one is a weird shell. We could try IPA. It's still not going to be found. If we try some commands like arp or route, I doubt they're going to be found right now either. But we want to look at like the routing table, the arp table. We want to see if this machine is what's called dual homed. And you're going to learn more about that when we get into the pivoting. But if this has like 2 NICs, and we're on one network and the NIC is on a second network that we never saw before, then maybe we can do something called pivoting and move into that new network. But we would be able to identify who the machine's talking to with an ARP table or a route. We could also look at like sudo privileges. So we could say something like sudo-l, but we're root, so we can run as everybody. So if a sudo user, as we talked about in Linux lessons, sudo user is able to run commands as elevated, but here as root, we're obviously already elevated. So other things that we can do, we can cat what's called the etc password file. Now this is very misleading because the etc password file used to be the password file. Now it just holds a placeholder. So you could see all the users that are on this computer, root being this one. There's a lot of built-in users here. But if you always scroll down to the bottom and you start at the 500s, that's where your users start. So there's actually 2 users on this computer as well. One's named John, the other's named Harold. So we look at these users and we say, okay, well, there's no password in this password file, but there used to be. Back in the day, there used to be. That's why they call it this. And now they moved it to this placeholder of an X. And what we can do is we can come in here and we can say, hey, cat etc shadow. And now you see the hashes are in here. So these hashes are what the X is placeholding for. We can actually combine both of these files with the tool and go offline and try to crack these. We'll work on that later on in the course. But just for now, like getting your wheels spinning on as to what we can do with root level access. We need to start enumerating again, looking at files on the computer, seeing what's out there and what we can do with it. But we'll get into post-exploitation techniques and thought process as we go through the Active Directory portion of the course, because I think it plays hand in hand. And we could talk about password cracking there and how to attack some of this stuff. But there will be a password cracking video on Linux as well when we get into the post-exploitation phase of this. But that's really it for now. So we've got the shadow. We could take this offline, try to crack it. We can enumerate files. We can try to, break into user folders and see what they've got in there. Maybe they've got password files stored in there, etc. So from here, we have rooted this machine twice. We've rooted it with Metasploit, we rooted it manually, and now we can start moving on. I do want to show you a few more attacks. So here's what's going to happen over the next few videos. We're going to talk about brute force attacks really quick on SSH. We're going to talk about credential stuffing. We're going to revisit that concept that we talked about in information gathering. And then we're going to look at our notes. And we're just going to compare notes and see where we're at with findings and everything else. After that, we're going to get into what I like to call the mid-course capstone, which is going to allow us to do a bunch of exploitation against a bunch of machines, and it should be really fun. So, end of spiel again. I will catch you over in the next video as we talk about brute force attacks. In a previous video, we discussed SSH and that it's really not always that much of a low-hanging fruit. So we've got SSH here, and say we want to attack it. Now there are 3 reasons we're going to do this, and this is from a realistic perspective. If we see SSH on an assessment, we're going to try to brute force against it or use weak or default credentials. And we're going to do that because 1, we're going to test password strength. 2, we're going to see if we can get in with a weak password or default password. And if we can, that also attests to password strength, correct? And 3, we're going to see how well the blue team performs. Do they catch us? Do they see us brute forcing? This should be something that should alert when it is being performed, but you would be surprised how often it does not. So during a pen test, I am as loud as possible. This is not a red team assessment where we're trying to be quiet. This is a pen test where we are as loud as possible and we are hoping to be caught sometimes, just told to tone it down a little bit. Hey, we're seeing you. Can you be more quiet? And we just want to be caught sometimes so we can give kudos in a report and say, hey, you saw us scanning here, and kudos to you, but you didn't see us scanning here and here. So this is how we really help fine tune a blue team and help fine tune a client as well, is being loud sometimes. So we're going to practice being loud today, and we're also going to practice brute force attacks. And we have the perfect opportunity to do that with an SSH port being open on this machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a tool called Hydra, and then I'll show you the Metasploit way as well. So Hydra is a brute force tool. So the syntax for Hydra is going to be this. We're going to say Hydra, and then we're going to give a -L for the user that we're going to be utilizing. In this case, I want to attack root. And then we're going to give a capital P for the password list. So if we wanted to use a password list with L, we can just say capital L. But here we're going to say capital P for the password list. And then we're just going to say user share wordless Metasploit. And I'm just going to double tab in this folder so you can see how many words are actually in here. There's quite a bit of wordless, and you can space, and it has wordless for all different kinds of things built in, and these are all over Kali, so it's good to know your folder locations, but user share wordless is one that we'll use quite a bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to utilize an attack with these Unix passwords here. So we have a Unix users and Unix passwords. We're going to utilize the Unix password list and just try to brute force with that. So we'll say Unix passwords, something like that. And then we're going to need to specify what we're attacking. So we are attacking SSH like this, and our IP address of our machine that we're attacking on port 22. And then we need to have a certain amount of attempts or threads at once, and we're going to limit that to 4. And then I'm going to do a capital V for verbosity, just because I want to see the user attempts flow through so that we can actually see what's going on here. So once you got the syntax ready to go ahead and hit enter. And you're going to see that it's starting to attempt root login password with all these weak passwords here. And hopefully it might find something. But let's go ahead and open up a new terminal here. And we're going to just make this a little bigger. And I'm going to load up Metasploit as well. And we're going to run the same exact thing in Metasploit. But I think it's good to know multiple frameworks and multiple tools to perform the same task. So here we're going to search for something like SSH. And this is going to be an auxiliary module, so we'll just scroll up. And we're going to look for something like SSH login. Perfect. Login check scanner. And make sure we don't have anything else. And that looks good to me. So let's go ahead and take this SSH login. And we're going to go ahead and say use options. And now we have kind of our brute force options here. Let me make this a little bigger so it's prettier. So we've got a brute force speed from 0 to 5, 5 being the fastest. Try blank passwords, no. We can set a hard password, and we could set a hard username. We could set a user and password file, a user as password file. Again, we can have a password file as well. So we have a lot of different options here that we can utilize. But we're going to go ahead and do the same kind of thing. We're going to say set username, and we're just going to say root. And then we're going to say set pass file. And similar to what we just used, we're going to say user share wordless Metasploit. And then we're going to say Unix passwords. and that should set the pass file. And then we just need an R host as well. Set R host, and we'll say 192.168.57.134. Say options one more time. And you can see that we've got our password file set. We've got our R host set. We've got our R port on 22. Threads is 1, username, root, and we should be good to go. Now we could set multiple threads here. We could set threads to like 10. This is really gonna amp it up. I mean, this should be detected in a second, but we're gonna try to run it. And we could set, actually, let me control C. Let's set verbose to true as well, just so you could see that it's actually working. Set verbose to true, and then we're gonna run this. And then it's going to attempt different credentials here, and it'll say, hey, I found it, and it'll light up green, and then we'll know it's good. So this is actually going kind of slow, surprisingly, and you can see here that we are at attempt 112, 116. So this is also going slow, and we do not have a successful attempt or login. I actually don't believe that there's going to be one, but you never know. I believe I remember taking this offline and trying to crack the password, and it wasn't any kind of weak password. So you can let your brute force run if you want to go with it, but I'm going to go ahead and kill mine. And that's it for this video. So from here, we're going to talk about a similar methodology called credential stuffing, which we've already talked about before, except we're not brute forcing, but we're using common knowledge to our advantage. So we'll talk about a little bit of credential stuffing in the next video. Let's talk again about credential stuffing, and while we're at it, we're going to talk about password spraying. Now, I realize we talked about this earlier in the course with breach parse and we leak info, but I do think that hammering concepts over and over and how important they are does help for information retention. So again, if we look at this example here, what is credential stuffing? Well, it's just injecting breached account credentials in hopes of account takeover. So if you look at the compromised server here in the upper right-hand corner, we pull down usernames and credentials. And we get these from leaks like the LinkedIn link or the Equifax link or whatever of those have come out recently. We get these leaked credentials. And we grab these databases, we search through them like we did with breach parse or like we can with WeLeakInfo, and we get these stolen credentials. And we take these credentials and we try to pass them to the site login. Now, we could take a look at a real life example of that, which I have pulled up here. And again, this is just an example of the Tesla breach parse. So we have some usernames and passwords. We have repeat offenders, remember? We also have similar passwords here. But the art of credential stuffing is taking these passwords and these usernames and throwing them at a website. That's all it is. So we're going to throw them at a website and just kind of spray and pray. Now, I just gone ahead and opened up this same Tesla-master. I've only opened up the users and the passwords just for an example of spraying. This video is going to be in theory only. I don't want you attacking Tesla's website. So just take this for example. You can follow all the way up until the point that we actually hit attack if you want to follow along. But for this, please do not attempt an exploit against Tesla. You do not know when the criteria is going to change, and I just don't want you getting in trouble just in case it does. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and go to Firefox. And while we are in Firefox, what I want to do is I want to take a quick pit stop and go to Google. And I want to look up something called Foxy Proxy. So go ahead and do this. Look up Foxy Proxy like this, not Froxy, Foxy Proxy. And go ahead and click on this top one here, the standard. And we're just going to go ahead and install the standard to our Firefox. And this is going to be a useful tool that we'll be using throughout the course. So, okay, we've got Foxy Proxy installed. Now what has happened up in the right-hand corner, we've got this here. You can see Foxy Proxies here, and we can just say, hey, options. And in the options, we're going to add in a proxy over here on the left. And we're just going to call it Burp Suite. And then over here, we've got proxy types. We're just going to leave this at HTTP. And then we're going to give it an address, which is 127.0.0.1, same thing as before. And again, this is 8080. We'll just hit save. And then we're going to go ahead and close out. And then all we got to do now is click this and click this. And now Burp Suite's turned on. Super simple. So let's go ahead also to our applications. And let's just go up here and open up Burp Suite. And let's test out our proxy and make sure. Ignore the errors. Don't worry about those. We'll just go ahead and hit next and use burp defaults. And I will give you a second here to catch up because I realize that I might be clicking through a little fast. So once you have everything set up like this, what we're going to do is we're just going to make sure our proxy works. So I'm just going to refresh the page and you can see that it worked. So easy on, easy off. That's all we're looking for here. Instead of having to go in the menu and go to preferences and, go through that whole process, all we got to do is click a little button. We can turn it on or off within a couple clicks. So from here, I'm going to turn the intercept off. And we're just going to go ahead and go to tesla.com. And Tesla should look like this when you go to it. In the upper right-hand corner, there is a sign in button. Go ahead and click sign in. And again, this is just a watch and learn exercise. You can follow along up until the point that we fire the attack. There will be opportunities here in very, very soon videos where you actually get to do this and you can practice along. So from here, let's turn on the intercept and let's go ahead and just put a fake email. We'll just do test@test.com and we'll do test as the password and hit sign in. And that intercepts here. So you can see the user equals, or email equals test@test.com and password equals test. We're going to go ahead and just right click this and say send to intruder. And from intruder, what we're going to do is we're going to go to positions in here and then we're going to clear it. All those green go away because it tries to auto select positions for us. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to highlight this here and we're going to say add. And then we're going to highlight this here and we're going to say add. So we're selecting two different parameters. We're selecting the email parameter and we're selecting the password parameter. And now we have different attack types up here. The most common that we're going to use is either sniper, but sniper uses one parameter. So we're actually going to use what is called a pitchfork here. And we're going to go ahead and go over to our payloads. And what we're going to do, or what I'm going to do, is I'm going to take this list of users and I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to paste it. And then on the second one, I'm going to take my list of passwords and I'm going to paste it. Now, what this is doing, if we go back, payload set 1 is all the usernames. It's going into the first one we set here. Payload set 2, all the passwords, those are all going into here. And we have 30 total counts, meaning what's happening with this pitchfork is payload 1, number 1, is corresponding to payload 2, number 1. So they only run together. So this will run the username and password. These are just the separated users and passwords. This will run this username against this password here. So what we're going to do is just we start an attack and it just says, hey, this is a demo version of Intruder because you're on community. Don't worry about that. It still runs. It's just a little slower. I'm going to go ahead and hit pause on the attack. Now, there are some interesting things that we can look for. When we're doing this, what we're looking for is a status code change of some sort. Maybe we see 200s here and we want like a 301, which means a redirect. Or we see a significant change in length. That would be a good indicator that maybe we had a successful login. Other items too is that we can click in here and look at the response. And we can say, okay, what did the response say? And if we scroll down, maybe it said something in here about fail login. Okay, we could not sign you in. And we could just take we could not sign you in like this, copy this, and then we can come back. We'll close this attack. We'll come into options here, and there's actually a grep feature. So we can clear all these in this little box, and we can just paste this and say, yes, match this here. So watch what this does. So we're going to start this attack again, and then I'm going to pause it. And you can know immediately, look at the checkboxes. This means it's showing up in the response, it's grepping it out, it knows immediately that we didn't sign in successfully. So this is an example of a credential stuffing attack. So we're looking for these few different things, a status change, a significant length. Like we're seeing all the same kind of lengths here, but what if it was like 5,000 or 2,000 or 15,000? If the page length changes, there's a good chance that you signed into something and we have a successful login. Same thing here with this. If you can find your error code or what it says and then grep on that, then you can click up here and just sort by that. And you can search for the ones that don't return that and possibly have a login as well. So this is the art of credential stuffing. Now, let's say we wanted to close this out. We want to go back and we want to do password spraying. Well, we're going to go ahead and just clear this out. And if you remember, password spraying is the art of using known usernames without a known password. So we'll just say add here, and we would gather a list of all the possible users that we can think of. We can look at hunter.io, we can look at, the breach password list, we can look at LinkedIn and gather people who work there, come up with this big list, and then, actually clear, sorry. No, this is right. We'll add these and we'll have all the different users. And then for this, we'll just change the request to like fall of 2019. Or we can set it up to, we could set this up here like fall 2019 exclamation, or whatever the time frame is, or however you want. Or maybe, they work at Tesla, so maybe we'll do Tesla 1 if they have a weak password policy, or 123, or @ or pound. You just try a few of these. The only downside to this is you are most likely attacking Active Directory accounts. When you're attacking Active Directory accounts, you want to be very careful because you could lock them out without even trying. So if you're doing a pen test, the best idea is to ask before you attack. Say, hey, how many attempts do you have unsuccessfully before a logout happens or a lockout happens? Because the worst thing you want to do is fire off 10 of these in a row, lock out a bunch of users, and cause a denial of service. That is very, very possible and very, very easy to do. So make sure you're not just firing these willy-nilly, that you have a good idea of the password policy, the lockout policy, etc. That'll really help you when you do these attacks. But you just want to do these kind of 1 or 2 at a time, wait a few hours, fire another 1 or 2 at a time, and you should be good to go. Okay, so same deal here. We could fire this and we could just say, I'll just say password 123. And we'll just switch this to sniper here. And if we come to the payloads, you can see it just kept the emails. There is no payload 2 anymore. So what this would do if we hit start attack is it would start firing this against this email address with the password of 123. And then this one with this email address with the password of 123. It would just go down the list. And that's all password spraying is. But the feature that I'm showing you here between credential stuffing and password spraying is by far the most common way that we get in on external assessments. Way, way more than you're ever going to see just an exploit out in the wild, where you're going to see this most likely. And second, you're probably going to see something like default credentials. So if you see a login page, always check default credentials because you never know. You're likely not going to see an exploit out there. Because the chances are, one, is that if you see an exploit like that out there, who knows who else has seen that already? What kind of bad actors? Because bad actors are scanning the internet all the time for these sorts of things. And if they're seeing it, then guess what? Or if you're seeing it, then guess what? They're probably have already seen it as well. So that's a bad situation. 2, you got to think of protection. And clients, just think of clients like a house. When you talk about the external of your house, your external, your doors have really good locks on them. You might have 2 locks on your door. You might have good lighting, all this other stuff, right? Like to try to keep bad guys out. But on the inside, some of your doors probably don't even lock. And that's really how you can treat an external assessment. The clients do a really good job of, buffing up their external. But when it comes to the internal, it's not usually as good. So same thing with physical assessments as well. You gotta get inside. Once you're inside, it's kind of easy breezy for the most part. So take that lesson away. If anything you take from the course, again, at least for the external side, take away that Enumeration and information gathering super important because you want to get to this stage here where you are doing these credential stuffing attacks, and you can use Burp Suite for it. This is my favorite go-to. There's other methods as well, but it's so easy just to grab any different website and just, intercept the proxy, send it to intruder, make one modification and fire it off. So super, super simple. This is something you will come up in an interview as well, so make sure you're very aware of it and make sure you watch this again if you need to understand the concepts. So from here, we're going to go ahead and take a quick look at our notes in the next video, just kind of where I want you to be with your notes. And then we're going to get into what I call that mid-course capstone, where I'm going to show you a bunch of different hacks and just my thought process and theories and thinking when I go into a scan and looking at results. And just so you can kind of get into the mind of an attacker and how we think. And then we'll start moving on to exploit development and my favorite, the Active Directory exploitation. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Let's briefly cover our notes so far. So we have covered a little bit of this, right? We covered the fact that we have our nmap in here and what we saw in port 22, port 80, etc. And we had a couple of findings from before. We had default web page on Apache, and we had this information disclosure as well. Now we've done some exploiting. So I've gone ahead and just put in here, I put the SMB exploit. So I put an example of what it looks like when we run it. And you could see that the whoami and the host name's in there. And then I've got the IP address. This is just for my notes. You can make this as detailed as you want, by the way. You could say, hey, I ran this at this specific time, and I ran it against this host, and here was the attack I ran, etc. And we'll get more into what your report should look like, but as long as you know, at least for me, as long as I know, or I have a screenshot of proof that I did it, and I have the IP address that I ran it against, that's pretty much enough. I can remember the rest and then type out the report. And same here with the mod SSL attack on port 80 and 443. And I don't have a copy of it right now, but the shadow file, we did uncover the shadow file as being a root user. So this is just notes for us. Perhaps we could use the shadow file information and crack the passwords, or we could go on and try to pass the password or pass the hash around, which we'll get to in later videos. And another thing that I added in here too was undetected malicious activity. So this is something that you're going to see on a report, and we talked about in the brute forcing video, where if we're doing any kind of brute forcing, we're doing it not only to see if we can get in with a bad password, but to see if the client catches us. So in this example, I'm just going to say, hey, they didn't catch us. Here's an example of what we did. Also scanning in there as well. If they're not seeing a scan, that's something that we're going to report back. So this would be typically a low finding. These would also be low findings. Anytime we get access to a machine, this is obviously a critical finding. So we just want to keep note of, what kind of things we're finding, take good pictures, etc. So I'm hoping that you are getting the gist now of what your notes should look like. Again, make these your own, however it feels good to you. This is just how I kind of do it. I don't have to put a ton of information in there for me to remember, as long as I have my screenshots, which are most important because that's your proof that you were actually there and you did it. Otherwise, it's just he said, she said kind of thing. So that is it for this video. That is it for this section. Congratulations again for making it this far. Now we're going to move into some of the fun stuff where we get to look at a bunch of different attacks and gradually just get a little bit more complex and learn some new things along the way. So I will catch you over in the next section. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the exploit development part of our course. I'm really excited about this because we get to start putting together some of the things we've been learning, including Python and MSF Venom to build our own payloads, and it's going to be really fun. So what we're going to be doing in this course is we're going to be using an attack machine and a victim machine. So the victim machine has to be a Windows machine. So you can run it in a VM. I have a VM here. Or you can utilize your own Windows machine if you're running through this course on a Windows-based machine. If you're running on a Mac or you're running on Linux, then you're going to have to virtualize this Windows machine. Now, shouldn't be too big of a deal if you're already running in a VMware situation or a VirtualBox situation. All we have to do is go out to the interwebs here, and if you go to Google and you just type in Windows Evaluation, the first thing that comes up should be Microsoft Evaluation Center. And you just click into there. And we scroll down just a little bit and it says check out the latest products. We're going to say check out Windows. And right here it says Windows 10 Enterprise. That's fine. Now I'm going to be running the whole course through Windows 10 Pro. It really doesn't matter as long as you're on Windows 7 or newer. So if you have Windows 7, 8, or 10, that's absolutely fine. And then you just click through here, say I want the ISO of Enterprise, and then just fill out all of your information, hit continue, get the ISO file and download it, and then load the ISO file into your VMware. That is the option if you are running it virtualized. If you're on a Windows machine, as I will be when I'm running through the course, you do not have to download this part. Now there are 2 items you will need to download. Both of these are going to be on your Windows machine. So on your victim machine, we're going to have something called Vuln Server. If you go to Google and say Vuln Server is the vulnerable server that we're going to be attacking. So this is a server that we're going to have running on this machine. It's going to allow us to write a custom exploit against this and get a reverse shell. It's going to be really fun. So we're going to actually use the gray corner right here from 2010. If you click on this and scroll down, there is a download button down here. It says vulnserver.zip. Now Windows may actually block this download. If Windows blocks this download, go ahead and turn off your Defender. I'm going to actually have you turn it off once we start the spiking video, but you can go into Defender and just turn it off in here in Windows Defender settings if you need to. So you have virus and threat protection right here. You can see that I have it turned off. You can just have it turned off. So from here, we can just download our attachment, and I'm just going to hit open because it's a .zip. So again, you're going to need a .zip of some sort. And then I just like to extract this out to my desktop is fine. Just somewhere easy to be able to get to it. And then we can extract the actual or unzip this whole thing right to our desktop. We'll just call this Vuln Server like this. Something similar to this is absolutely fine. What's important is that we're able to have all these files on our desktop. So that's exactly what we want here. And then the second part is Immunity Debugger. So if we come over one tab here, we've got Immunity Debugger from Immunity Inc. And this is the link we want to click on. Now what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to run the program through this debugger, and then we can see all sorts of cool stuff. It's a program debugger. So when we are triggering different types of exploits, we can see how it's affecting the memory, the stack, how it's affecting the program, and it'll make a lot more sense once we're in there, but it's really, really nice. So if you scroll down just a little bit, you can see it says download, and it says download Immunity Debugger here. This is all we gotta do, and you can put a fake name in here. You can put Joe Schmo, and then however you'd spell that, and then put a 123 fake street, etc. fake at fake.com, and then fake here, and it should let you download it. You don't have to put in your real information, and see it just works right away. Hit save, and then once it's done downloading, we're gonna go ahead and get this installed. So if it takes you some time for this to download, go ahead and just pause your video, and then we're gonna go ahead and keep going. So I'm gonna say run on this, and say yes. And it's going to say that it needs to install Python 2.7. So we're just going to say yes and say I accept, next, and install. Close that. Now it's going to launch the Python installer. We're just going to do it for all users. If you have an issue with that, you can install it just for you as well. Next, next, next. Let this load, and it's all very, very point and click on this. So our goal here is to be able to write our own exploit code by the end of this, and it's going to actually be really fun. So let's go check and make sure that immunity ran. And this is what immunity looks like the first time you load it up. So from here, we've got everything installed. We're going to watch a short video on what a buffer overflow is and how we are going to leverage it. And then we're going to get right into the hands-on portion of attacking this victim machine here from our Kali machine and getting a reverse shell off of this victim machine. So I will catch you over in the next video when we start covering what a buffer overflow actually is. So let's talk about anatomy of memory. So when we talk about anatomy of memory, we have the kernel at the top and we've got text at the bottom. So if you think of your kernel, think of your command line. You can also think about this as a bunch of ones. And your text, you can think about as your read-only code, and you can think about that as a bunch of zeros. So this is only for informational purposes, but we can also call this the kernel the top, the text the bottom. Where we're really going to be focused on, though, is going to be the stack. So if we dive into this memory here and we dive even deeper and we go into the stack, it's kind of similar. So we have these registers here, and I'll provide links down below on how to brush up on some of these registers if you're not familiar. But the important things, what we need to know for this lesson, is that you have the ESP, you have your buffer space, your EBP, and your EIP. So we can think about this again as the ESP sitting at the top and the EBP sitting as the bottom. So what happens is you have this buffer space, and this buffer space fills up with characters. So the buffer space is going to go downward. What should happen is if you're properly sanitizing your buffer space, then if you send a bunch of characters at it, say a bunch of A's, for example, like this, you should reach the EBP but stop. The buffer space should be able to contain the characters that you're sending. Now, however, if you have a buffer overflow attack, then you actually overflow the buffer space you're using and reach over the EBP and into something called the EIP. Now, the EIP is where things get interesting. This is a pointer address or a return address. So what we can do is we can use this address to point to directions that we instruct. Now, these directions are actually going to be malicious code that gives us a reverse shell. So we're going to learn that later on in future videos as we go step by step. So this doesn't have to seem very logical right now. You just have to very, very base level understand that what's happening in the stack is that you're overflowing buffer space. So if you can write over the buffer space and write down all the way to the EIP, you can control the stack and you can control the pointer, and eventually you can have a reverse shell, which will lead to root. So it's going to make a lot more sense when we dive into hands-on. This just is more of a theoretical thing. So let's talk about really quick the steps to conduct a buffer overflow. So the first step we're going to cover is called spiking. So spiking is going to be a method that we use to find a vulnerable part of a program. Once we find the vulnerable part of the program, we're going to do fuzzing, which is kind of similar to spiking. So fuzzing, we're going to send a bunch of characters at a program and see if we can break it. If we do break it, we want to find out at what point we did break it, right? So we want to find something called the offset, and we use that offset to overwrite the EIP, that pointer address that we were talking about. Once we have the EIP controlled, we need to do a few house cleanup things. One is called finding bad characters. The other is called finding the right module. This doesn't need to make sense right now. But once we do that, and we have this information from steps 5 and 6, we can generate shellcode, this malicious shellcode that will allow us to get this reverse shell. So we're going to use that. We're going to point that EIP to our malicious shellcode, and hopefully we're going to gain root. So again, this will all make sense as we dive into the future videos and we get hands-on. So if you look at these videos, these are the videos that are going to come. So our next video is going to be on spiking, second one's going to be on fuzzing, and so on. So if you have trouble with one area in particular, you can watch that area specifically and not have to look through a long video and hopefully break this down into little nuggets. All right, everybody, let's get started with spiking. So before we get started, we're going to do a couple of housekeeping things. First, I want you to disable your Windows Defender real-time protection if you have that enabled. So it looks something like this, where you should turn off this button right here. We're doing that because Vuln Server will actually be blocked by Windows Defender if you try to run it and then run anything malicious against it. So good on Windows Defender for picking this up. This is more recent. As I've taught this in the past, it never used to, but now it does. So we're going to make sure that we turn off this real-time protection. And then we're going to make sure that when we run our programs today, our immunity debugger, and we run our vuln server, that we're running them as administrator. So let's go ahead and first get our vuln server running. So remember I told you to extract that to a folder. Here's my vuln server folder. I'm going to right click on this and I'm just going to run it as administrator. So now that I've got that running, it should look something like this. And we're also going to run immunity as administrator. So we're going to do that because if we don't, it's actually not going to see vuln server running as administrator and be able to access it. So we need both running as admin. And the other reason is for vuln server running as admin is when we get the shell on this, we're actually going to end up as root automatically. So we just want this in the most simple terms. So I'm going to bring immunity over here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to File, and we're going to say Attach. And if you scroll down, you'll see vuln server right here. I'm going to go ahead and just hit Attach on that. Okay, in the bottom right corner, you see that it says pause. What we're going to do is just hit Start over here, this play button up top, and now it should say running. So if you're running, then we are good to go. So now we're going to dive into our Kali Linux machine. So I'm in a command prompt in Kali Linux. And the first thing I want to do is connect to vuln server and see what it is. So by default, vuln server runs on port 9999. And you need to know the IP address of your Windows machine that it's running on. So once you know that, what we can do is use a tool called netcat. We'll use a switch of NV. We're going to do a connection here. And we're just going to say the IP address. So mine is 1.90. And then the port that you're going to connect on, which is 9999. Okay, so you should see the screen that says welcome to vulnerable server. Type help for help. So it's saying help in all caps. We're going to do that, all caps. And then we get this list of valid commands. So it looks like vuln server takes commands based on what you enter, right? So there's a stats command, rtime, ltime, etc. So the primary command that we're going to be focusing on is this trun command. Now, when I've taught this in the past, I've left out actually how to find this. So I wanted to teach in depth how we're going to find that trun itself is vulnerable. So we're going to do something called spiking. What spiking does is we're going to take this command one at a time. We'll say like stats, and we're going to say, hey, stats, I'm going to throw a bunch of characters at you and see if I can overflow that buffer that we talked about in the previous video. So do we overflow the buffer? Does the program crash? If it does, then we know, hey, stats is vulnerable. If it doesn't, okay, maybe it's not vulnerable. We'll move on to the next one. So I'm going to show you what a non-vulnerable one looks like and what a vulnerable one looks like, and we're going to look at stats and trun for that purpose. So when we spike, we're going to use a tool called generic TCP, and it's going to look something like this. Let's go ahead and Control C, or actually we'll just type exit out of this if we can. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use, it's called generic send TCP. Let's type that in real quick. Okay, so here is the usage for this. You're going to need the host. Okay, we know the host of 192.168.1.90. You're going to need the port. We know that. You're going to need a spike script. And then you're going to need these skip variables here, which we're just going to leave at 0. So this is what the usage should look like. But we need this spike script. So let's go ahead and talk about that first. So I've already gone ahead and pre-written it. It's very, very simple. So let's take a look at it in gedit. So first we're going to look at stats. So we're going to have stats.spk for spike. So what we're going to do is we're going to read the line. Then we're going to take a string, and the string is stats. Remember, that's what we had here, the stats command. And then we're just going to send a variable at it. Okay, and then when we spike this, we're going to send variables in all different forms and iterations. So it might send 1,000 at a time, then 20,000 at a time, then 5 at a time. It's just looking for something to break the program. So that's what spiking is. We're going to send all kinds of different characters randomly, essentially, to try to break this part of the program. So now we're getting into specifics here. So if you can imagine, we've got this stats.spike. We're also going to have the trun.spike, and the trun's going to have this trun command here. So if you're following along, make sure that you type this out just how I have it, just these 3 simple lines. Go ahead and save it as stats.spike. And what we're going to do is we're going to send this. So again, we're going to say generic send TCP. And then we know the host is 192.168.1.90. The port is 9999. The spike script is stats.spike, and then we're going to just say 0 space 0. Now, we've got immunity running right now over here. If you have multiple screens, you can run it on multiple and kind of watch what happens. If we hit enter here, it's going to just be running through this. This is running. You can see that it's taking commands, but nothing's really happening. We'll let it run through all the way just to make sure. And so you're going to see a little bit of a different action when we do have something vulnerable. So we're going through, looks like we're connecting. If we look at Vuln server, you can see that we're actually connecting to the client here and then disconnecting from the client as we send these commands over. So I'm going to go ahead and just kill this for now. You can hit Control C. Doesn't look like it's vulnerable. In a real test, we'd let it run all the way through, but I'm telling you now it's not vulnerable, so we'll just save a little bit of time. So now let's take a look at the trun spiking. Again, should look the same, but you should have a trun.spike similar to this. So if you want to go ahead and type this out, and we have this trun command here. So when we send this spike, I'm just going to tab up twice and change this to trun. And then again, we have to make sure immunity is running. You see it's running in the corner. We're going to go ahead and hit send on this. And immediately immunity starts blinking. What happened? We have paused over here. There's an access violation when executing. Okay, let's go ahead and just kill the process in Kali because we don't need to keep sending all these. So your Vuln server has actually crashed. You're not seeing an error message because it's being held up by the immunity debugger. If we were to actually detach or unpause this, then Vuln server would crash. So we've hit a violation. This is really good. This says, hey, something's vulnerable here. And if we look at the registers, we can kind of get some information. So one of the informations that we're picking out is, okay, we're seeing this trun command sent, right? And we're sending this trun command with a bunch of A's. So imagine this going into a buffer space, right? Like we talked about before. Okay, we're sending this command, A. In a perfect world, the trun command, or this should all fill into a buffer space, right? All these A's. Well, what's happened here is that it's actually filled over. So if we look at the EBP, remember the base register, right? You see 41414141. That's just hex code for 4 A's. So we've got these here, these 4 bytes, right? And we've gone actually over the ESP as well. A bunch of A's here. Okay. And we've gone over the EIP. So now we've overridden everything. Remember when we talked about in the last video, the EIP is the important factor. If we can control this EIP, we can get malicious and point it to something malicious, right? So that's what we're going to do in the next couple of videos. So I've showed you how trun itself can be spiked and found. In the next video, what we're going to actually be covering is how to fuzz the trun command with a Python script. So that way you can kind of feel out how this process is done in another way called fuzzing. So it's going to be very, very similar where we send a bunch of A's, and it might feel like a little bit of a repeat lesson, but we're going to build out a Python script to do that. And then once we do that, we're going to work on finding this EIP location, because once we control that, again, we can inject malicious code. So step 1 done. I will see you in the next video for fuzzing. All right, everybody. So in this video, we're going to be covering fuzzing. Fuzzing is very similar to spiking in the sense that we're going to be sending a bunch of characters at a specific command and trying to break it. The difference is with spiking, we're trying to do that to multiple commands to try to find what's vulnerable. Now that we know the trun command is vulnerable, we're going to go ahead and attack that command specifically. So a couple housekeeping items. We're going to go ahead and boot up Immunity Debugger again. So we're going to administrator. And we're also going to run Vuln Server as administrator. So from here on out, you can assume that Vuln Server is going to be running and Immunity is going to be running, and that we're going to have it attached. So let's go ahead and show that process one more time. And anytime that you do crash Vuln Server, we're going to go ahead and restart it and restart Immunity as administrator and reattach. So there are issues sometimes where if you crash Vuln Server and then you try to reload it with Immunity already open, it causes issues. So it's best to just close out of Immunity as well, reopen Immunity, and start it again. So let's go ahead and make sure everything's running. It is in the corner. Okay, so let's go to our Kali machine now that we have this out of the way. And I've built out a script in Python that we're going to use to fuzz. Let's go ahead and take a look at that script. So we're going to say gedit. I called this 1.py. You could do that as well. And if you want to pause the video now and write this out, copy this down, that's fine. You could also do it while I'm talking if you want to save some time. So I'm just going to go line by line and kind of talk about this code, and then we'll see what it does. So from the top, we're just declaring that it's Python. We're going to import a few modules here. We're going to import sys and socket. That way that we can call out the specific IP and port. We're also going to import sleep. That way we can sleep it for a second before trying this process over again. So with those imports out of the way, what we're really focused on is we're declaring a buffer variable here, right? So this variable is called buffer, and inside buffer we have 100A. So we've got this A times 100. So what we're going to do is we're going to say while true. So we're going to loop this, right? We're going to say while true, I want you to try something. What we're going to try is we're going to try to connect to this socket. And the socket, all that is this AFI net, that's your IPv4, and the sock stream, that's your port. So we're going to say, hey, let's connect to this IP address. Remember, this is my IP address for my Windows machine that's running Vuln Server. So we're going to connect to this IP address, we're going to connect to this port, and then once we do that, we're going to send over a trun command. Remember, we spiked the trun command, found it was vulnerable, and when we spiked it, when we looked at the registers, we actually saw this little bit of extra information here. So we've got this little command that goes after the trun that needs to go in there in order for the program to actually understand it. So that's why this has been added here. So we say, hey, send over this message, send over trun, and then also send over the buffer. So send trun with 100 A's. Okay, then close that connection, go to sleep for a second, and then we're going to append to buffer another 100 A's. So what we're going to keep doing is as long as there's a connection here, we're going to keep sending you buffers. And it's going to get bigger and bigger. So next time we're going to send 200, then we're going to send 300, 400, etc. until this thing breaks. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to really narrow down where it's breaking and at what specific byte size. So what we're doing here is we're going to fuzz it. And then once it breaks, it should print out an exception that says, okay, fuzzing's crashed at X bytes, right? So let's go ahead and see what that's going to look like. So go ahead and save this file if you haven't already. One other important thing we need to do is we need to change the mode on this to execute. So we'll say change mode +x 1.py. That way we can execute this. And just again to confirm, we've got Immunity running. So let's go ahead now and say 1.py. Hit enter. And you should see the connections coming through here on Vuln Server. So every time it's doing this, it's sending a new 100 bytes. We can watch Immunity for the crash. The crash should happen pretty quick. And then once it does, you can kill the program because sometimes it doesn't kill itself. So it's not the best. There we go. We paused it. No more connections. So let's go ahead, go into Kali, hit Control-C, and we crashed somewhere around 2,700 bytes, give or take. Okay, so let's look at the crash. So again, we see the crash came through, and we've got a bunch of A's sitting here. We didn't look like we actually overwrote the EIP. That's fine. We just need to know approximately where we crashed at. So we'll just call it, for even round numbers, that we crashed somewhere around 3,000 bytes. So what we're going to be doing in the next video is we're actually going to be finding where the EIP is at. So how we're going to do that is we're going to use a tool that's going to create these random, not really random, they're cyclical values that we're going to send out. And then we're going to say, okay, what is the EIP value and where does it correspond in the specific number of bytes that we sent over? So remember, controlling this EIP value, let's go back to it. Controlling this EIP value is what's the most important. Once we can control this EIP value, we do a little bit of housekeeping in our exploit development process, and then we point this guy to our malicious code and we get root. So we want this EIP, we want to control it, and in the next couple of videos, we're going to learn how to do just that. So I will catch you over in the next video when we cover finding the offset. So when we talk about finding the offset, we kind of talked about in the last video, we're going to be looking for where we overwrite the EIP because that's what we want to control. Now, lucky for us, there is a tool already out there that will help us do this. And this tool is provided by Metasploit Framework. It's called Pattern Create. So in our Kali machine, we're going to go ahead and just get that set up. So what we're going to do is we're going to say user share Metasploit Framework tools exploit pattern create. Okay, now we're gonna have to give this a couple switches, actually just one for the first one. We're gonna give it a switch of L for length, and the switch of L, we're gonna say 3,000. So why 3,000? Well, if you remember the last video, what happened was we found somewhere around 2,700 bytes is where the Vuln server program crashed, and then I said, hey, let's just make it an even 3,000, it'll be nice. This is where it comes into play. So we're gonna take 3,000 bytes, and we're gonna hit enter here. What's going to happen is it's going to generate this crazy cyclical code here that we're going to actually have to send into Immunity and Vuln server. So you see all this jumbled stuff. All we're going to do is just take it and we're going to copy it. And then we're going to modify our script that we created earlier just a little bit. And I've gone ahead and done that. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So let's go ahead. I called it 2.py. If you want to modify your 1.py and make it easier from the last video, and then I did a little test here just to make sure it worked, but what we're going to do is we're going to paste this value into here, but first I want to cover this script. So remove some things, remove the time because we don't need it. We still have the import sys and socket. We don't need a while loop anymore. We can just say try. And we're going to do the same connection, just try in the connection, make sure we connect to that address, and then we're going to send this offset, right? So I'm going to go ahead and paste that value into here. You can go ahead and work on getting this set up. What we're going to do is we're going to send this value, and then we're going to close the connection. If for some reason we cannot access it, then we'll throw an exception and say error connecting to server, and then we'll exit out. So what we're going to do is when we send this in, we're going to get a value on the EIP. So we're going to see that the program crashes, and then the value on the EIP is going to come back. And then we're going to use a tool, and we're going to say, hey, okay, Metasploit, I found this value on the EIP. What is the offset? So we've got this pattern create right now, and then we're going to have pattern offset here in a second. So let's go ahead and get this saved up. Once you're ready, go ahead, hit save. Same thing again, what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to change the mode like we did last time to execute on 2.py. And also we're going to need to get Immunity running and Vuln server running. So I'm going to do that really quick here. Okay, it should look like this. Hit play, make sure we're running in the bottom, and then go ahead and fire off that script. Okay, should throw an exception right away. And you see now that we have this trun command that came through with our values that we sent, right? You see this cyclical value goes to the A's. It crosses over the EBP, down the EIP, even comes through the ESP, right? So what we're doing here is we have completely overwritten everything. We've gone too far because we've crossed this ESP, but really what we're interested in is this EIP. We want to be able to control this value. So we see this value in here is 386F4337 right here. This is what we need and we're interested in. So let's see how we can make this value of use. So if we come back to this screen and let's just tab up a couple and we'll go here and just backspace. What we're going to say is instead of pattern create, all we're going to say is pattern offset. We're going to give it the same switch of L and we're going to say 3000. But one thing we need to add in here is a switch of Q, and that's for our finding. So our finding was 386 F as in Foxtrot 4337. And now if we hit enter here and we did it right, we should find a pattern offset, meaning that somewhere inside of these 3000 bytes, it found this pattern and it relayed back to it. So if you see here, we actually do have an exact offset match at 2003 bytes. This information is critical because that tells us now that at 2003 bytes, we can control the EIP. And that's exactly what we're going to do in the next video. We're going to look at the EIP and see if we can control it. So we're going to try to overwrite it with very specific bytes and see if those bytes show up. So let's go ahead and move on to there. Okay, so now we're going to try to overwrite the EIP. So in the last video, we discovered that the offset was at 2003 bytes. What that means is there's 2003 bytes right before you get to the EIP, and then the EIP itself is 4 bytes long. So what we're going to try to do is overwrite those 4 specific bytes. So as always, go ahead and get your Immunity Debugger running with Vuln Server attached. When you have that, let's go ahead and hop right into Kali Linux. This should be a pretty short video. So what we're going to do is let's go ahead and just gedit the last script that we wrote, which was 2.py. And we're going to modify this together. So what we can do here is we can just delete this offset variable because we don't need that anymore. And instead, we can just write shellcode here. And we'll switch out this offset variable to shellcode. And then let's go ahead and set this equal to A times 2003 plus B times 4. So let's make sense of this real quick. We're replacing what we sent before to find the offset with the shellcode. Now the shellcode's nothing but A's and B's right now, but it's going to get malicious in a minute. So what we're doing here is we're sending 2003 A's. Why? Because that's where the EIP starts. So byte 2004 starts the EIP. So what we're doing is we're sending a bunch of A's, but we want to make sure that we don't overwrite the EIP with A's and have no idea if we're correct or not. So remember, A's are 4 1s, B's is going to then be 4 2. So in theory, we should see 4 2, 4 2, 4 2, 4 2 on the EIP when we overwrite it. So let's go ahead and just fire this guy off. I'm going to save this, and you could save it as .3 if you want. I'm just going to keep it .2 to make it simple. And then what we're going to do is 2.py. Remember, if you did make it a new file, go ahead and change the mode. And since we have Vuln Server running and attached to Immunity Debugger, we should just be able to fire this guy off. And it should break the program. So we have pause down here, access violation, great. Okay, so let's talk about what happened here. So you see the EAX, Trun ran through, bunch of A's, we're used to seeing that. EBP, 401, 401, 401, 401, good, came through. But look here, the EIP is 42, 42, 42, 42. Now we only sent 4 bytes of B's and they all landed on the EIP. Guess what? That means we control this EIP now. So from here, it's pretty smooth sailing. We got a couple of housekeeping things we got to do in terms of finding bad characters and finding the right module to send this to. But once we do that, we're going to generate some shellcode. We're going to point this EIP here instead to that return address that's going to be malicious, and then we're going to gain root. So hopefully this makes sense. Again, just to reiterate, we have controlled the EIP, and now we're going to start to get malicious. So in the next video, we're going to talk about finding bad characters. Okay, so now we're going to talk about finding bad characters. When we talk about finding bad characters, we're talking about this in relation to generating shellcode. When we generate shellcode, we need to know what characters are good for the shellcode and what characters are bad for the shellcode. We can do that by running all the hex characters through our program and seeing if any of them act up. By default, the null byte x00 acts up. So we're going to take a look at what these look like and if any of these bad characters act up in our program. So let's go ahead and actually go out to Internet Explorer or Firefox in Kali. Okay, and in a small update to the course, the link I was going to have you go to, or I did have you go to, no longer exists. So my bad chars now looks a little bit different, but what we're going to do is we're going to go to the first one here, which is the Cytopia. It is actually a bad char generator. It's a tool. You're welcome to download it and set it up. Fairly easy to install with pip if you want. It shows you all the usages, pretty nice and neat. The cool thing, however, is we can just copy what's already here. So this is in your course resources. All I want you to do is right click, copy this, and then we're going to paste this into a script as the video resumes. But this is in your course resources. Check it out. Great little tool. Otherwise, let's go ahead and continue the video. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just gedit the last Python script we worked on. For me, that was 2.py. It could be whatever you named your script. And if you recall, we had just overwritten the EIP with 4b. So we're just going to add on to that. So I'm just going to hit enter twice here and then hit paste. And remember we talked about the null byte, this x00 being bad. I'm going to go ahead and just delete that anyways. So we don't even have to run it through our program. So when we're talking about bad characters, what we do here is we run every single character in hex through it, right? So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0A, 0B, 0C, etc., all the way to XFF down here. So some programs have characters, just let's make something up, for example, say X70. It may be some command that runs in the program that tells it to do something, right? So we don't want to use X70 in our generating of shellcode because then the shellcode is going to break if it uses this X70. So what we do is we parse all of these through the program and we see what looks funny. Basically, it's an eye test. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and save this. Actually, we need to add one more thing. I apologize. We're going to add the bad chars here after the EIP, and then we're going to save this. And then again, if you're creating a new file, make sure you change your mode. Of course, make sure that you have your immunity running and you have vuln server attached. So what we're going to do now is we're going to fire this off. It should break the program. No big deal. Okay, it comes through. We see again, we've got a bunch of 42s here. But what we're really interested in is the hex dump. So we can look at that dump this way. We could say, at the ESP, right-click and say follow and dump. Okay, if you look here, let me try to make this bigger. If you want to make it bigger, you can actually go into the text or the appearance, I apologize, and you could say the font to OEM, I believe, is the biggest. Okay, and I will try to pull this up a little bit so it looks bigger here. So what we're going to do then is we're going to look at this hex dump here. And if this is small, I apologize. So what we're doing is we're saying, okay, I sent X01, so we're expecting a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then we expect 0A, 0B, 0C, 0D, 0E, 0F, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, etc. We go through this whole list, right? Remember, the last thing we sent was FF. So we're looking for FF down here. We go through every single thing and we see if there's anything out of place. Now, heads up, there's nothing out of place here. Vuln server was made to be very easy, very straightforward. So there are no bad characters. But if there were a bad character, it would be out of place. It would not make sense. Like, for example, if you're reading through and you see 10, 11, and then 12 was missing, and then it goes to 13, okay, it's likely that 12 is a bad character. Now, to make more sense of this, I do have bad characters pulled up. Let's take a look at this. So I've got this dump here instead. So if we look, we've got 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, B0, B0, 0, 6, 0, 7, 0, 8. Okay, so right away we're missing 4 and 5, right? So we can identify those as bad characters. And what about the rest? So if we keep going through here and we keep looking for these B0s, which is how it's identifying, then we know that those are bad characters. Now, I will say that it's not going to always be B0 that shows up. It's just going to be something that's out of place. And this is definitely an eye test that you're going to have to run through when you do buffer overflows, and you're going to have to make sure you find everything. I have in the past missed one bad character, generated my shellcode, and pulled my hair out for 30 minutes to an hour looking at why it was not working. So if you want to look at this in practice, go ahead. You can pause the video, see if you can identify the rest of the bad characters here. But if not, I'll identify them for you. It's these guys, right? So what you would do is you would write all of these down. You would say, okay, I'm missing 04. I'm missing 05. I'm missing 28 over here. I'm missing 29, missing 44, 45, etc., right? So you want to make sure you notate all of these down, because when we generate shellcode in a couple of videos, you're going to have to remember all of these. But again, lucky for us, the only thing we're going to have to take out when we generate shellcode is that null byte, which we took out here, or else we would see it start with 00. In a second small update to this video, I want to talk about the bad characters here. Now, when I first gave instruction and taught this, my understanding of bad characters was actually incorrect. And as we grow older and learn more, we learn more about some of this stuff. So I'm back with a minor correction here. First of all, the B0 character itself, right here, is okay as a character. Second of all, consecutive bad characters, all you have to worry about is the 4 here. The 5 is actually an okay character. So anytime you have consecutive characters, which we have here, our only bad character is the first character in that sequence, so 44 in this instance. With that being said, I am one that takes caution. I would rather take out 4 and 5 and even B0 and run that and have my shellcode generate. Now, I can understand wanting to understand the technical portion of it and what is right and wrong, and I agree 100%. But your shellcode will still operate if you took out 4 and 5, or if you just took out 4. In some rare exceptions, that might not be the case, but for the most part, and especially in beginner exploit development, that is true. But I did want to add some clarification here. From here, we're going to move on to the next video. Okay, now on to finding the right module. So when we talk about finding the right module, what we're saying is we're looking for a DLL or something similar inside of a program that has no memory protections, meaning no dep, no ASLR, no safe SEH, etc. Now there's a tool out there called Mona Modules that we can use with Immunity Debugger to achieve this. So if you go out to Google and you search Mona Modules, you should be able to find a GitHub page for it. You're going to need to download this mona.py file and put it in this specific folder here. So the specific folder is this PC, program files x86, Immunity Inc., Immunity Debugger, py commands, and you're going to paste it right into here. So go ahead and do that, and then once you're ready, let's go back to Immunity Debugger. And now I already have the program attached, Vuln servers here. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually type in this little bar down here. So what you can type in is exclamation Mona Modules and hit enter. So that'll pop this guy up here. And if you look, what we can see is these protection settings right here. Look, we've got false, 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 false across the board for some of these protection settings. And that's what is ideal for us, right? We've got trues on some of these other things, but really what we're looking for is we're looking for something attached to Vuln server itself, which you can see this Vuln server right here, and we're looking for all falses. So a prime candidate immediately right away is this essfunc.dll. So we're going to go ahead and just keep that in the back of our minds, because we actually need to do one other thing. Now, if we know this by memory, we can go ahead and type it out right here, but I want to show you the process for actually finding what we're about to do. What we're about to do is find the opcode equivalent of a jump. So let's go ahead and look at how to do that. To do that, we're going to go into Kali Linux, and we're going to locate something called NASM shell. So we'll just type locate NASM shell, and go ahead and just copy this Ruby right here, and then paste it in like this and hit enter. So when we say we're looking for the opcode equivalent, we're trying to convert assembly language into hex code. So what I'm doing is I'm going to type in this assembly language, this JMP ESP. This is a jump command. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this as a pointer. So the pointer is going to jump to our malicious shellcode, and that'll make more sense here in just a little bit. So the hex code equivalent of JMP ESP is FFE4. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take this information, this FFE4, and we're going to go back into Immunity, and we're going to type this instead. So let's delete the modules part. We're going to keep Mona, and we're going to say Mona find, and we'll do a -s, and we're going to say XFF/XE4, and then we're going to say M for module, and we're going to use this ESSfunc.dll. So if that makes sense, we've got our opcode equivalent here, the FFE4, and then we've got the module of ESSfunc.dll, which is right here. Again, we chose this because it goes with the Vuln server program, and it has no memory protections. So this is a good candidate for what we want to do. So let's go ahead and just hit enter on this guy. Okay, and I think I forgot a slash here. Let's check this out. Okay, so that is better. So what we're looking for here is we're looking for these return addresses. So if you look at this 625011AF, that is going to be a return address. So let's go ahead and just write this one down. We're going to go right down the list and find what works. So I always like to start at the top, and you can see here that it found this ESSfunc.dll, and it's got all the memory protections here listed as false. So now with this information, what we're going to do is we're going to go into Kali. We're going to just type exit here on this NASM shell. And we need to edit our Python script. So whatever Python script you're at, I'm still on 2.py, go ahead and open that guy up. Let's delete out the bad characters because we did already find those. And now what we're going to do is we're going to delete out this B4. So let's write in real quick what our return address was. Remember, it was 625011AF. So now, instead of having 4 B's in place of the EIP, we're going to put this pointer there. So we're going to have the EIP be a jump code, and then the jump code is going to go to malicious code. So we're going to enter that in here. Now we're going to enter it in a little special. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to enter it in like this. We're going to say /XAF/X11/X50/X62. If you notice, this is actually in reverse. So you see AF115062. We're doing this reverse for a special reason. So when we're talking with x86 architecture, we're doing something called little endian format. So x86 architecture actually stores the low order byte at the lowest address and the high order byte at the highest address. So we actually have to put this in reverse order. So what this should do now is this should throw the same error before, but it's going to hit a jump point. So we can do something special in Immunity to actually catch this. Let's go ahead and hit save on this script. And let's open up Immunity again. So let's go ahead and minimize this. And let's maximize this guy again. Okay, so we're going to do something special here. So first what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to click on this little arrow here. It's kind of bluish black. And we're going to enter in this expression to follow, 625011AF. So remember, that's going to be our jump code. So if we hit OK, we should find this FFE4, this JMP ESP, right? And this is perfect. This is exactly what we want right here. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit F2. So F2 will turn it blue. And what we have just done is we've set a breakpoint. So we have the breakpoint running. What this means is we're going to overflow the buffer, but if we hit this specific spot, this jump code, it's not going to jump to further instruction. It's actually going to break the program and pause right here for further instruction from us. And that's all we want. We don't have anywhere to jump to right now, so it's not important. We just need to know that we are hitting this, we're overwriting the EIP in the exact spot we need to, and then we're going to be able to jump forward. So let's go ahead and hit play here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go back into Kali and we're going to execute our script. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll say 2.py here. Run that. Oh, you know what I did? Apologize here. I never deleted the original code here. So if you caught that, good job. Okay, let's go ahead and try that now. Okay, so we ran it, and what happened? You see breakpoint at ESSFunc.625011AF happened. The program is now paused. We have hit our breakpoint. That means we control this EIP. Look at this, 625011AF. We control the EIP. Now all we have to do is generate some shellcode, point directly to that shellcode, and we are home free with root. So we're going to go ahead and do that in the next video, and I will catch you over there. All right, the video you have been waiting for. This is the last and final video in the course, and now we're going to gain shell. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to use a tool called MSF Venom, and we're going to use that to generate shellcode. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the command over, and then we'll talk about what this command does. So we're running MSF Venom. It's brought to you by Metasploit, and we're going to set a switch of P for payload. So we're going to set the payload for Windows because we're attacking a Windows machine, and we're going to do a shell reverse TCP. So we didn't declare x64 here, so we're going to assume x86, but we'll declare that later just in case. So when we have a reverse shell like this, what we're doing is we're having the victim connect back to us. So we need to provide our information. So by our information, I mean the Kali machine IP address, which is going to be our L host right here. And then we're going to also have a port we're going to be listening on. So that's going to be our L port, our listening port. And we're going to declare that as 4444. I'm setting an exit func equal to thread. All that does is make our exploit a little bit more stable. We have a -F for file type. We're going to export this into C. A -A for architecture, that's x86. And then a -B for bad characters. Here's where finding the bad characters becomes important. So we didn't have any besides the null byte, but it's always good to teach it and explain why it would be important later. So if we had any bad characters, this is where we would put them in. So let's go ahead and just hit enter here. And it'll take just a second to generate this shellcode. And once it does, we're going to copy and paste it into our Python script that we've been using. So we're going to grab this information here. We don't need the semicolon. And it's always good to take note of the payload size. So it's not going to matter too much for us, but if you do go into exploit development, payload size can be everything. It could be that you're working with a very limited space. Say you only have 200 bytes left, and a payload size of 351 is just not going to work because you're going to truncate it at 200. So always good to note the payload size, especially as you dive deeper into other projects, if you do go farther into exploit development. So let's go ahead now and open up our Python script we've been using. So I'm still on 2.py. And I'm going to declare a new variable here up at the top. We're just going to call this overflow. Set it equal to this. I'm going to add a parenthesis, hit enter, and then add a closing parenthesis like that. So what we're also going to do is we're going to come down here and we're going to add in overflow, and then we're going to talk about this. So what we've got here is we've got the shellcode, right? So what's going to happen is we're going to submit the shellcode. In this variable shellcode here, we're going to say, okay, 2003 bytes. That gets us to the EIP. When we get to the EIP, we're going to hit this pointer address, right? This pointer address is just a jump address. So we're going to jump to this set of instructions that we provide. The set of instructions we're providing is this overflow here. So what we need to do before we submit this overflow is actually insert something else. And those are called NOPs. So it's going to look something like this. So it's called X90 like this. And we're just going to add 32 in. And so NOPs are padding, essentially. They stand for no operation. If you've ever heard of something called a NOP sled, that's kind of what it's referring to. So when we have something like this, what we're doing is we're just adding a little bit of pad space in between this jump command and this overflow shellcode, right? So in an instance, if we didn't have this, it's possible that our overflow wouldn't actually work. We wouldn't get command execution on the computer because something interfered here. So we just like to add a little bit of padding in between these two, and that makes it a little bit more safe. Again, if you have a limited space, say we go back to the 200 byte example, you might really need a little bit of padding, like 8 bytes, 16 bytes. You have to play around with it and figure it out. So a lot of exploit development is just messing around with the exploit until something works. So we're going to go ahead and just save this now. Okay, and then on another tab over here, what we're going to do is I'm going to set up netcat to listen. So it's going to be NVLP like this. And then I'm going to put the port to all fours because that's what we declared in our shellcode generation. Okay, lastly, what we need to do is we need to run vuln server as administrator. We don't have to have it in immunity this time. All we have to do is just make sure it's running. And then we're going to fire off this guy. So we're going to say 2.py, hit enter, check this over here, and look at that, we've got a shell. So now we are on this computer. We could say, who am I? Okay, it's Heath. Heath is me. That's the administrator. Perfect. We are good to go. So we have gone from fuzzing a program, spiking a program, not knowing anything about the program, finding the vulnerable trun command. We used that to fuzz it. We found and controlled the EIP. We found some bad characters. We found the right module, generated some shellcode, and now here we are at root. So hopefully this has been easy for you. My recommendation is to go through and make notes again, try to understand the theory behind what's happening, and also try to understand everything that's going on. This is as basic and simple as overflow can get. Of course, there are memory protections. It's not generally this easy. This is just meant to teach people how buffer overflows work. Hello, everyone. So this is a update to the course. It is 2021 and Python 2 is now very much deprecated. So I showed you some tips and tricks and techniques to run Python 2, and it really was all manual method for utilizing Immunity Debugger. And I think the manual method's good, so you understand why you're doing what you're doing and how you can go through it. Now I'm going to show you some automated steps that we can use using Mona, and I'm going to show you how to build out our script in Python 3. Now I'm going to semi-speed run through this because you should have most of this already. So I'm going to walk through and talk what is different in Python 3 and what you see and what might look a little bit different. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is we're looking at our initial fuzzing script here. And you can see I'm calling out up here user bin Python 3 as opposed to our user bin Python that we initially called. And we're coming through and everything holds true for the most part, except when you come down, we have a couple of differences. So I am putting in a payload of this trun command, right? And we have the buffer that we're sending through. This should look familiar. This is what we did, except we did this in the send command here. All we're doing now is we are encoding this. Now, this might run on its own, although we've seen some issues with Python 3, especially without encoding it, where this will not run. So now we're doing byte encoding, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute when we get to our last script, what it looks like kind of manually, and how you can get this to execute. But for here, we're doing byte encoding, and this is allowing this to send. It's a feature of Python 3. We have to declare what we're sending over in the data. So we're sending over these bytes. Okay, so very, very small differences here. The declaration of Python 3 at the top. Everything else holds true, except we're adding this payload command and we're using a .encode to send this over. Other than that, the print command down here, you'll notice prints now have parentheses. Python 3 feature. We don't just do print and then you're used to seeing just the quotes. Python 3 now, you have to utilize the parentheses around a print. So we're doing that. Okay, so simple, straightforward on this script. If you need it, go ahead, pause on any of these and copy it down if you want to try this out. I'm going to move on to the second part here. So when we're trying to find the offset, same exact thing. Notice all I did was delete the buffer. This looks exactly like the second script that we ran in the initial videos, right? But this time, all I'm doing is removing that while loop, bringing this over. This is identical to the script we created. And again, the print command is now in parentheses. There's offsets here, and it's just encoded. Nothing different. We generate this the same exact way, and then we find the offset in the same exact way using our tool set. Okay, so we generate this, go in there, see the offset. The offset will be exactly the same. We'll find that it's 2003, and we'll move on to our next script where we try to control the EIP. So again, make sure you're using Python 3 at the top. Just small minor changes here. So now with Python 3 at the top again, our third script, we're going to go ahead and take this, make it into shellcode. This should look no different again. And now we're just going to replace that with the shellcode variable. Same thing. This is even identical. These last two scripts here, purely identical. All we have to do is change offset into shellcode now that we have found that the offset's at 2003. And we're trying to overwrite the EIP with the 4 bytes. So easy breezy. Moving on, this is where we get into a little bit of fun. Okay, so I showed you how to go out and grab bad characters lists, and we did the manual method where we reviewed everything, and gosh, that took a long time. What we can do here is we have the bad characters. Let's just take a look at this script first. Now, this is how we have our bad characters. Again, all we have to do is add the bad characters in, add that to the end of our shellcode, have our shellcode here for the payload command. This is all the same, payload encode, ship it off, we're good. But I want to ship this off, but I want to show you something first. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm going to switch over to a Windows VM that I have. I'm going to go ahead and load up Vuln Server, and I want to show you a couple commands. So the first command, we're going to use Mona here, and we're going to set a configuration working folder. So what I've done is I've gone in here, and if I went to my C drive and I just created a folder called Mona right here. So go ahead and just create a folder if you want. And what I do now is I declare this is where I want Mona to save data. So I'm just going to say exclamation Mona config, and then we're going to tell it to set a working folder just like this, and then C Mona like this. Okay, you can hit enter on that, and it'll say that you have set the working folder. Now, once you have your working folder set, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and generate a bad characters list. Remember, we had to go out and find that bad characters list. It's not that difficult, but this is a nice little feature that we can do. So I want to show this to you. We can use a Mona command. So we can just say Mona, and we can come in here and just say byte array, bytearray, and then we type in -cpb, and then we're going to say x00. So what we're doing here is we're generating a payload list for us, and we're saying go ahead and strip out the x00. We don't need that. You could, in theory, just delete this and just run Mona byte array, but here this is fine because it'll take out the 00 for us. We don't need it. You can see that it generated a list right here, but if you go to your Mona folder, it put it into a nice text file here. I'm actually going to delete this and let this all go one more time. So I'm going to let it start off as if we were doing this together. Okay, so this text file here, this byte array, you come in here and look, it's got the byte array generated for you. You can literally just copy and paste this into your shellcode. You don't have to go out and do anything. This will generate it for you. So if you had bad characters you wanted to strip off, say like a 01, 02, it would take that and automatically do that for you. Very nice little feature. It also creates this bin file. Okay, so it knows the characters it's going to be comparing against and looking for. So once we go and we run this, I'm going to go ahead and click the C up here. That's going to bring us back to our normal view. I'm going to go ahead and hit play up here. I'm going to let the program run. And then what I want to do on my side is, and you can run your Python 2 script if you don't have a Python 3 put together yet. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this for.py. I'm going to run the bad characters like we would before. So I'm just going to run python 3 4.py. I'm going to send that off, and hopefully we should have an error over here. We do. We've paused. You can see we got the access violation. We overwrote with the 4.2s. That's pretty common. This right here is where we would right click and we would say follow in dump. And we go manually review everything. Oh, that's terrible. Instead of doing that, why can't we just use Mona? Well, we actually can. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So here we're going to say Mona. I'm going to delete some of this. And we're just going to type in compare, Mona compare. And we give a -f for the file location. And so we're just going to say C, Mona, and then we're going to compare this bin file that it generated, byte array.bin. So it generated this byte array bin file right here. It's going to compare that, and it's going to look at the address we give it. So we want to give it the address of the ESP sitting here. So we have, in the ESP, we have 010A F9 C8. And this changes. Your ESP value might be different. That's fine. So just enter in whatever you see in your ESP. And I'm going to go ahead here and I'm going to just hit enter on this. And it's going to look for any bad characters. And it says here that the bad character results are 00 and 80. Now, when we manually reviewed this, we didn't see 80 as being a bad character. It says possible bad characters 80. If you see this and you want to generate your shellcode without 00 and without 80, that'd be perfectly fine. You don't have to go through and utilize 80. It will generate shellcode without it, and just to be safe. Okay, but here, I don't say it's false positive. It's just detecting a possible bad character. So you would take this list here and just go ahead and generate your shellcode based on that. So again, fairly straightforward. Now, next step. Remember, we had to find the jump address. We had to find our return address. And we went and we found the XFF, XE4, and we had to do that in more of a convoluted way using Kali Linux. We don't have to do that here. We can actually utilize a Mona command as well to do all this. So I'm just going to make this clean again. And let's actually just go ahead and open up a new immunity debugger, and we'll just go ahead and load and attach Vuln server again so that we have a clean instance. We can let this run. And remember, when we were searching for our essfunc.dll, we tried to find the right module. When we came in here and we said, hey, Mona modules, and we looked and we saw the essfunc.dll and we said, hey, that's good. And we went and found the XFF XE4. Well, we can kind of bypass a step here. Let's say that we identified a module like we did. Now all we have to do is we can just say, hey, I want to find the jump address for ESP. Okay, and then we just say, I want to find that for essfunc.dll. And we're going to do that, and we should find a return address when we run that. So it'll bring you to this screen. All you have to do is minimize this. And if you come into here, you'll see that we ran the command. And we have the same results as we did before. So we don't have to go through that whole process of finding the XFF XE4. This will do it for us. And you can see the 625011AF, that is identical to what we had before. So we found the exact same thing. Okay, I'm going to close this out. And I don't think we're going to need this anymore. So I'm going to go back to our Linux, and I want to look at the last script that we run. Okay, so this is where things get a tad bit different, and I wanted to show you the manual byte encoding here. Sometimes the payload encode does not work the proper way we want it to. I was running into issues with this, running this script. So the other thing that we can do is manually byte encode this. And so what I've done is I've generated our payload. This is the same thing as running MSF Venom, ran through this, got our reverse shell ready, and I've just put B's in front of every single line. This is telling it we're going to byte encode this. Okay, and come down here, look at the shell code. There's a B in front of the A, there's a B in front of the return address, there's a B in front of the NOP, or the no operation, and then we've got the overflow, which is already byte encoded here. We're going to send that over, same thing. This time we're going to just say payload, put a B in front of the trun command, and then we're going to send over payload without the encoding, and hopefully everything will work just fine. I'm going to go ahead and execute this script here. So I'm going to open up a new tab, and I'm just going to set a listener on all fours. And then I'm going to just open Vault and Server here on its own. And we shall test this and see if it works. So let's go ahead and run Python 3. This is my 5.py. Execute that. Hopefully we have a shell here, and we do. Same process. Again, not much changes throughout this whole thing. I kind of sped ran through this, and it's more or less because I know you already have the foundations down. Now it's just changing this to the modern times and changing this to show you some of the easier tips and tricks. So when you're looking through these, just go ahead and note Python 3, note the subtle differences of having to encode and having to have a separate variable down here, and then the subtle differences of using parentheses for your print commands as well. Everything else, for the most part, stays the same. There are differences between Python 3 and Python 2 that are more significant than this, but in terms of our scripting and what we have to do, not very significant for this aspect. So again, note the payload encoding. If you're running into any issues with Python 3, putting a B in front of your payload is a good practice, good idea. So, all right, that is it for this video. I will catch you over in the next section. Welcome to the course capstone. This is the 2021 edition of the course capstone, and we'll get into the old capstone, the new capstone, and what the differences are. But the course capstone is meant to challenge you and test your skills and knowledge up to what you've learned so far. Now, not everything is cut and dry. These boxes are not meant to be particularly easy. They're actually meant to be learning experiences. So what that means is you are welcome to go through these machines on your own, give them a try. I realize that we have not talked whatsoever about privilege escalation. We have not talked about a lot of the tools that you're going to see, and this is by design. Hacking is not going to be able to show you, a course on hacking is not going to be able to show you everything, but you're going to get to pick up some ideas and a little bit of Googling and a little bit of frustration and really just getting in there, getting your hands dirty and seeing what you can come up with. So I encourage you to try these on your own in the order that they're listed. However, if you want to just watch and follow along, that's absolutely okay as well. Now, I mentioned privilege escalation, but we'll talk about that here in a second. I want to show you the old course capstone and where the new course capstone is. So I have uploaded the new course capstone. This is not all the machines yet. This is just the ones that I started uploading. All you gotta do is go in here and download these machines. You can run them with VMware or VirtualBox. I've got setup instructions for a couple of the machines. Once you've seen one Windows or one Linux, you can see them all and how to download them and run them. So that's pretty straightforward. The link will be provided in the resources or below the video, depending on what platform you're on. Now, the old capstone. Here's the old capstone. I have not pushed the new update yet, so this is what the old capstone looks like. You could see there were 10 boxes. There were 5 hours of material, or was 5 hours of material. The issue with the old capstone was that we were relying on a platform called Hack-the-Box. Hack-the-Box was a paid subscription platform. It cost anywhere from $10 to $15 a month. I'm not sure exactly of the true cost, but I realize not everybody can pay additional funds to go and use this platform to walk through these machines. So what we have done is we have made these machines available via YouTube. So I'm going to put this down below as well, but there is a series originally released called Pen Testing for Noobs. If you look, all 10 of those machines are going to be here as well. So you're welcome to come to the YouTube channel and watch these videos. If you want extra content, extra walkthroughs, and more of the practice and more of the capstone, you're welcome to go sign up for Hack the Box, do all that. But we are removing that dependency from the course. Now, these machines are going to require what is called privilege escalation. We are going to walk through privilege escalation. What I mean by that is, I mean that we are looking at a box. When we land on the machine, we are not root or we are not system on that machine. We are a low-level user, we have low privileges, and we need to escalate our privileges to the highest level that we can. So all of these machines, except for one at the time of this recording, are going to have some sort of privilege escalation involved. Now you're going to get to see some cool tooling, some different techniques and tactics, but it's not going to go into super depth on this. There are courses out there that we have created. We have 2 here, the Windows Privilege Escalation for Beginners and Linux Privilege Escalation for Beginners if you are on Udemy. If you are on the Academy, same concept, Windows and Linux, just depending on the platform you're on and which one you prefer. So if you're interested in going after any sort of certifications, if you're interested in doing any sort of capture the flag or getting better at just escalation in general, highly recommend these courses. If you're looking to stay kind of on that practical path, then these aren't really necessary. It's really based on chasing certifications in the hacking realm, like your OSCP or some of the other certifications that might be out there. They use a lot of privilege escalation to test on. But again, it's not really on the practical side of things. So depending on what your motivations are and reasoning, however, we are going to show them in this course only because they are a good introduction to hacking. It's good to see the other side. It's good to see some of the exploits that are out there, some of the thought processes that are out there. And then once we get into the Active Directory section, it'll really take off from a practical standpoint, and we're really going to start hacking like we are hacking a real network, and it's going to get really fun. It's my favorite section in the whole course. So with that being said, go through the courses again in order as you see them. So however you see them in the list, go ahead and go through them. We're going to add more courses over time. As of right now, the dependency is that you download these and install these for your lab. Again, there will be instructions for those. In later attempts, we are hoping to offload these to an online lab. Unfortunately, we won't be able to do that with Udemy, but with the Academy platform, we should be able to do that. So we're working on getting that. But for now, the Google Drive link that you see attached to the introduction video, this video, will have all the files that you need to download in order to complete this section. So with that being said, go ahead and complete the next box. I'll see you in the next video, and hopefully you rooted it. So before we begin the capstone, I want to show you how to import a machine. And I'm going to show you, starting with Blue, how to import Blue, which is a Windows machine. And then we're going to go ahead and import a Linux machine in a later video. So that way you should know how to do both, though the process is exactly the same. So for Blue, what we're going to do is we're going to come into VMware here, and I'm going to show you VirtualBox as well. We're going to go open virtual machine, and you're just going to select the file that should be available to you here, which is Blue. I've already done that through the magic of editing, so it's already here, and I'm just going to go up here and show you that. We'll get to settings here in a second. For VirtualBox, same exact process. I'm going to go ahead and just go to import. I'm just going to paste the location in here. You can also use this to go find your file. And I'm going to hit next and import. Okay, and it should start importing this file. So here we go, it's importing. It'll take 50 seconds, that's fine. Gives me time to talk about the settings. So you can see here that we are in bridged mode. Okay, we don't want to be in bridge mode. Let's go ahead and edit this. Go to bridged, and we're going to turn this into actually just NAT. Now you can choose how much memory you want to use here. Mine's set to 4 gigs, that's fine. I've got a lot of RAM. If you do not, then go ahead and maybe turn this down to 2 gigs would be absolutely fine. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK here. Now, I'm going to power on this virtual machine, and then we're going to wait for the other one to finish importing, which it has. So here, while we're waiting on this, go ahead and go to Settings, and you're going to want to do the same thing. So network, no bridge, don't do bridge. We're going to do NAT, okay? And then we're going to just enable the network adapter here. So you should have your NAT network set up. Remember that when you did that originally with our settings. If you need to, you can go back to Tools, you can go to Preferences, come in your network, make sure your NAT network is set up. Anyway, come in here, you can go to your settings, and again, make sure that this is on NAT. So, or NAT network, I apologize, NAT network right here, okay? And then I'm gonna hit okay. And then all you need to do is power this on. I'm going to show you with the virtual or the VMware, it's going to be the same process. Now, you can log in as the administrator. You're going to get credentials for every box. That is for the sole purpose that you can access the IP configuration and find the IP of this machine. Okay, just to make it a little bit easier. So there will be an accounts file in here. And here you can see the administrator password is password456 exclamation. So we're just going to do that. And we're going to make sure that this box is online and that we can communicate. So I'm going to quickly go to command, and you can install VMware tools if you want, make this pretty, all that jazz. I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to quickly figure out what's what. You can see 192.168.138.135. I'm going to come over to Kali Linux. I've got a scan that we did for 134 up, but that's okay. I'm just going to ping 192.168.138.135. Okay, and you can see I'm getting a response back. And that's it. You need to make sure that you can communicate with your machine. So if you're running VirtualBox, make sure you spin it up, you log in, you figure out what it is that your IP address is, and go from there. Very, very straightforward. So that is it for this video. Go ahead and attempt to attack Blue. See if you can figure out what the deal is and where you can go and how you can exploit it. And meet me in the next video once you've attempted it to see if you were able to successfully root or system this machine. Thank you. So let's start by taking a look at our Nmap scan. Now, the IP address I got was 192.168.138.135, and not a lot of ports came back. So we got 445 back, and we can scroll through, get a little bit of information, like we see a NetBIOS name on this machine. We see that it's running Windows 7 Ultimate 7601 Service Pack 1. Doesn't appear to be part of a domain, just a work group. Same thing, work group, authentication level user. And really there's nothing here that is a big indication as to what this could be. So when we have this, as we discussed before, when we're looking at SMB specific vulnerabilities, because that would be my guess here, would be the vulnerability would be SMB related. We need to enumerate SMB in one of two ways, really. The first of that being, well, can we search based on version information that we see here? Can we search on this and see if there's anything vulnerable that could be there? Second of all, if we can't find anything right off the bat for this, maybe then we can go and use something like SMB client, do some enumeration. Maybe there's a null session we can connect to. Maybe there's a file or something, some sort of information with a username or password or something along those lines that gets us into this machine. Otherwise, we're pretty much stuck with version information. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and just copy this. And there's a reason that this is the first machine in our run through of the capstone, because this is the easiest, or should be the easiest. So we're going to go ahead and go out to Firefox, and I'm just going to go google.com. Come in here, we're going to search for this, and we're going to search for exploit. It already knows me. And we can look through some of these and see if there's anything here that really stands out. First thing for me, we've got a few. We got one here, one here. These just kind of say, they don't necessarily say what they are, so we might need to click into them. MS17010 keeps popping up quite a bit. Let's see if it tells us anything here about architecture. Really doesn't, just shows up as this. So we'll have to do some reading into this. This is a local privilege escalation. Doesn't really help us because we're not doing privilege escalation at this point. We're just looking to see if we can even get on this machine. Okay, this shows us, hey, MS17010. This is a exploit for it, written in Python, it looks like. And it says, hey, okay, this could be our target. So we're going to take two different paths here. We're going to look at it first in Metasploit, and then we're going to take it from a manual path, and we're going to see if this is indeed what we're after. So let's go ahead and just go to MSF console. And yours might look a little bit different than mine, depending on what version of Kali you're on, but the process should be the same. I'm on MSF5. So we're going to go ahead and just search Eternal Blue. And I do know recently they combined all the Eternal Blues into one. So again, yours might be a little bit different than mine, but it should be the same process or concept. Now, the first thing we want to do is we want to look up this SMB scanner, right? We want to do an auxiliary. Our auxiliary modules are going to tell us what is there. It's going to be a check. It's not going to be so much an attack. It's more of scanning than anything else. There are some attacks in auxiliary modules, but they're not full on exploitation. So let's go ahead and just say use one. And we're going to go options in here. And all it's going to do for us is it's going to come in here. We're going to provide it with an R host. We're going to run it, and it's going to provide a check. Okay, so we can just say set R host to 192.168.138.135, whatever your IP address is. And then I'm going to say run. And it says host is likely vulnerable to MS17010. Okay, there's a second way to do this. So let's go ahead and just search Eternal Blue again. You can also search MS17-010 or however you want to do this. It should all show up. I'm going to use this number 3 here, the Eternal Blue one. We don't know. We do know that we're on Windows 7, so the Windows 8 won't work for us. And PS exec we could run, but I'm going to go ahead and just use the one that is most popular and works usually out of the box. So I'm going to go ahead and just say use 3 and type in options. And in here, we have a verify option, which means we should have a check option here. So I'm going to again just say set R host. I'm going to show you the check feature. 138.135. Okay. And then I'm going to say check. All right, and so check did exactly what the auxiliary module did for us. It says, hey, it's vulnerable. Okay, or likely vulnerable. So what we need to do is we need to set a payload here. Now, something that you might not know yet at this point is that payloads are, by default, they are set to 32-bit, at least in this example, because there could be a 32-bit exploit in here. Actually, this says 64-bit, so I could be lying to you. Some payloads are set to a 32-bit to start. Because we know that this is a 64-bit machine, or at least should be, given that it's enterprise, we're going to go ahead and set this to 64 bits just to be safe. So this is a practice that I take on if I know the architecture of the machine. I'm going to go in here and set my payload for myself. Now, this should be 64-bit, but just to be safe, we're going to type in Windows and hit Tab. Because it only auto-completes to 64-bit, this is perfect. Now, I think where my mind was going is that I want this to be a Meterpreter shell, and I don't know if it defaults to Meterpreter. It might default to a reverse TCP of some sort. So we're going to go ahead and use a Meterpreter shell because we want a nice interface to have. So I'm going to go ahead and set that options one time, and I'm going to look at the L host here, and we could just say set L host over to, we could just call it ETH0, or you could set your IP address in here. Again, you can IPA or ifconfig, and whatever your IP address is, I'm running on ETH0, so whatever your whatever you choose, you could place here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. Now, while this runs, this might not work on the first go. It might not work on the first few goes. This is going to try going through what are called different sets of grooms on here. And it looks like it worked right away. But sometimes this doesn't work right away. And if yours doesn't work right away, that's okay. It might take a few attempts through this first process, and you might have to hit run a few times for this to go. Now, I have chosen using Blue or Eternal Blue for this course because it's so relevant. This is a 4-year-old exploit now. And I see it on so many internal penetration tests. It's not even funny. Like, I wish it would just go away, but it is this easy to run and just get on a machine and gain access. And it's incredibly easy and incredibly prominent in environments. Think about environments where they have systems running that they can't update or do anything with, and you have this, or they just have poor patch management and you have this. It's so easy to get on a machine, and then you come in here and you say hash dump, and you dump out the hash. And now we've got an administrator hash. We can go try to crack that. We can do past the hash, which we're not there yet. We're going to get there in the Active Directory section. You're going to see what the differences are on this kind of stuff. But you can utilize these hashes to our advantage, and we're going to play around with that a little bit later in the course. So, with that being said, this is something that you will likely see if you do become a pen tester. You'll see this in an environment, and it is really this easy to get into a machine like this. So we have used this now to come through here and gain access. We're going to go ahead and go back, and we're going to try doing it again, but we're going to do it through a manual method. So I'm going to open up a new tab. All right, and we're going to come in here and I'm going to search Google. Now, if we want to go look for manual methods of exploiting a system, we're likely going to use GitHub, perhaps exploit database. Now, this exploit database one, I'm not going to use only because it gets a little tricky with Eternal Blue. There's a few things that we have to do. I don't believe this one is just one that runs right out of the box. It has a little bit more information here than what's leading on. Now, we might need to reboot this machine, by the way. We'll give it a go and see if it works. It might not work out of the box because we've already exploited the system, but we'll try it anyway. So what we might want to do is something like Eternal Blue, and we might want to say GitHub. Okay, and we can come through here and look through different ones. I like to open a few, and I like to look at them and read the amount of stars that they have, read the descriptions that they have, detailed walkthroughs. All of these have decent stars. This one doesn't have a great walkthrough. This one has a very good kind of detailed walkthrough, has video tutorials, has a decent amount of stars, and I honestly like it. So we're going to go ahead and just get the auto blue one from Endgame. So go ahead and find that and get to this. We're going to go ahead and copy this code. And there have been commits since 2021. So that's great. There's recent commits to this, which is awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and go into, I'm going to cd into opt, and I'm going to git clone this. And that's not what I should have been copying. Should have copied this, but we'll try it one more time. And paste here. All right. And then I'm going to cd into auto blue, and it gave instructions in here somewhere about how to install this. So let's go to installation, pip install requirements for Python 3, which we should be on at this point. So we're going to do pip install -r requirements, just like that. Let that install. Looks like everything is satisfied or installed, so that's good. From here, we're going to go ahead and do the usage. Now, there was a checker in here, so we can run Python with the checker. So I don't know, it says Python 2, so let's go ahead and run Python 2 with it. It could be Python 3 too, so we might run into an issue. Checker.py 192.168.138.135. Target is not patched. Testing name pipes. Okay, so this is something that I actually use on an assessment, regardless if it's this or the Metasploit version. I will take a screenshot of this. There are reasons sometimes where we won't run the exploit. If the environment has critical machines running, for example, like in a hospital, I might not run this exploit because this can take down a machine. And if I don't know what machine I'm taking down, who knows in a hospital, right? You don't want to make that mistake. So it's always better to play it on the safe side when we're running these exploits. If you don't know, you can always ask your client, say, hey, I've got this machine. Here's the IP address. I want to run this exploit. Is that okay? And get permission first. Now, there's a lot of ways, which you'll see when we get into the Active Directory exploitation part of the course, that we can compromise a domain and we can run all kinds of exploitation, own the whole domain controller, and not worry about tipping over the server by any means. This can tip over a server, so you want to be safe with these kinds of things. So with that said, I'm going to show you how to run this manually, but it's going to tip your box over. I'm going to give the secret away. It's going to tip your box over, and this is going to be the lesson learned from running this exploit. I'm going to show you the proper way to do it manually. With the version we have, it's not super easy to get a shell from the manual method. We could go around and play around and find one that works, but I'm going to show you this from here's how you would run it manually, but also here's the dangers of running this in an environment. And this is a perfect box to show you why we don't go run remote code execution on machines in an environment, because this can take down a machine. So let's go ahead and run through the process. I'm going to show you the process, and then we're going to knock this machine over. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to cd to the shellcode directory, and we're going to run shell prep. And I'll say this now and watch the exploit will work fine. So, oops, we're going to go ahead and just hit yes here. And then we're going to enter in our reverse connection, 192.168.138.128 is mine. I'm going to say 9999 for this. We can do 2222 for x86. We're not going to use it. Now we have the opportunity to use a interpreter shell or generate a regular command shell. If we do the interpreter shell, we can go into interpreter and we can actually run it in the sense that we use a multi-handler and pull down. It's basically a listener. It is a listener, and it's going to pull down a interpreter shell for us. So it's just the shell code that we're generating. We already used a interpreter shell to get the first shell on this. So now we're going to go back and we're going to go ahead and try to do this with a regular command shell. So you can press 0 if you want to try the interpreter shell method. You can also press 1 to generate the regular command shell method. We're going to go ahead and just do the regular command shell. We're going to generate a staged payload. Staged or stageless here should crash this machine. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to run this listener prep once this is all done. So it's doing this for us. We're going to go ahead and CD back in a second once this is done. All right, now I'm going to CD back and we're going to do listener prep. And this is going to run a listener in Metasploit for us, which is nice. We could just as easily run this with Netcat. We can just say nc nvlp like we have before. nc-nvlp like this, and whatever port we're listening on, all 9s before. So we're going to go ahead and just let this run its course as intended. And we're going to do 9999. We did 2222 here. And we're going to go ahead and say regular command shell, all the same things we did before, staged payload. And it's going to start this up for us, hopefully start up some listeners, and you should see a lot of work just go in. Okay, it's got all those listening. It's waiting for any sort of connection to come through. So the next thing we're going to do is, and it is using the multi-handler for us already, it's just using a shell reverse TCP instead of a interpreter reverse TCP here. So last thing we're going to do is run the exploit. So we're just going to say Python eternal blue like this exploit, and we're on 7.py. Our target is 192.168.138.135. Path to shellcode is just shellcode and then scall.bin. And we do not have to provide a number of groom connections. That's optional. We're going to run this and we'll cross our fingers. You never know. Might work. Doesn't look like it's working. We blue screen the machine. So this is a perfect example of why you just don't willy-nilly run this in an environment, okay? So a good lesson learned, honestly, because if you're in a critical environment, you have no idea what that machine does. Imagine if this was something in a hospital controlling equipment that was being used during surgery. Who knows? If you took that down, it could be very, very, very bad. So it's good to see the other side of it. Again, get permission before running something like this, unless you know that your environment's safe. It's okay to take down some machines, etc. But usually that's not the case. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next machine. Hopefully you got this and got through the walkthrough just fine. So I'll see you in the next machine as we walk through that and hopefully take down another box. Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you how to quickly open up the Academy machine in both VMware and VirtualBox and how to set it up. After this, you should have seen a Linux setup and a Windows setup, so you should have no more issues setting these up. I have full faith in you beyond this, so repeat the process. If you need to go back and watch the video, just come back and watch one of these. Anyways, we're going to open a virtual machine. If you are in VMware, I'm going to go into my folder that has it, Capstone, and I'm going to go to Academy and just double click, open that up. It's going to ask me where I want to put it. I'm going to go default settings. You can choose wherever you want. I'm just going to hit import. It's going to take a minute to import. While that's happening, I'm going to show you, and you might see a retry. Just go ahead and hit retry on that. It should work. While we're waiting, I'm going to go ahead and show you the other side of things, which is VirtualBox. Go ahead and hit File. Go ahead and hit Import Appliance. And then just go select your file. I've got it for copy paste purposes. It's a lot easier. And VMware thinks it can just take over. It's wrong. So in here, make sure you just have your OVF file that you downloaded. Hit next. And then come in here and you're going to see these settings. You can go ahead and just run the default settings for now and just import. We'll change the settings once we have it imported. So go ahead and import that. On VMware, we're just going to ping pong back and forth real quick. Under the settings for the Academy, go ahead and just hit Edit Virtual Machine Settings. In here, this is a Linux machine, so 1 gigabyte of memory is fine. We don't need a lot. Come to your network adapter and make sure that it says NAT and not bridged. Hit OK. Go ahead and log in. Now you can power on this virtual machine, get that going. In the next video, I'm going to show you the password, which is just root TCM. Same thing here on the Academy. Go ahead and go to Settings. We're going to go to Network. Make sure your NAT network is selected. Remember, we created a NAT network. Make sure your NAT network is selected and that you are on the same network as your Kali Linux machine, or you will not be able to communicate with it. So with that out of the way, you can go ahead and power this on depending which one you're on. Catch me in the next video when we will talk about logging in, finding the IP address, and getting started with attacking this machine. I'll catch you over in the next video. All right, on